Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. This is our final episode in the environmental allergies series, and today we're talking about mold. Now, if you have missed the last 3 episodes, you can go back and listen to those at your convenience. Last week, we covered asthma. We're going to be talking a bit about asthma today and how mold can fit into that. The week before, we covered pollens and grasses and hay fever. And the week before that, we covered dust mites. And so these are all, environmental allergies that certain people react to. The important thing to note about mold, though, is that mold can cause allergic reactions, but it can also cause inflammatory reactions as well. So it's not always sort of related to allergies, but mold is a common cause of allergy and asthma symptoms, something that is often not recognized when it comes to asthma, that mold can be exacerbating the symptoms of asthma. So mold is a type of fungus that produces spores that float through the air. It can grow on almost anything when moisture or damp environments are present. It can be found indoors and outdoors. And as I said, it can cause both inflammatory and allergic reactions. And mold tends to be a bigger issue now than it ever has been before because of the way our houses are built, the materials that are used, the more modern materials that are used in building. Now, this is definitely not an area of expertise for me. Nicole Bilsma, who I hope to get on the podcast at some point, her surname is spelt Bijlsma, is Australia's sort of leading expert on building biology. And she has a website, buildingbiology.com.au, which is a great source of information on mold and other sort of factors within the home that can be contributing to illness and sickness in modern society. She's got a fantastic book called Healthy Home, Healthy Family, which goes into a lot of detail about mold and, as I said, other sort of factors within buildings and within our environment that can impact our health and well-being. So the interesting thing to note about mold is that around 24% of our population, so that's a quarter for those of you who maybe aren't strong at maths, a quarter of people cannot create antibodies to mold genetically. So there's nothing that can be changed about that. So every time they're exposed to mold, it sets up an inflammatory response in their body that doesn't switch off. In contrast, the rest of the population, so 3/4 of us, do produce antibodies which enable us to recognize and clear the antigens that are involved in mold exposure from the body. And this is why some people in a water-damaged home or when they're exposed to mold can get very sick, while their partners or other people that are living with them can be completely well. So genetically, some people just don't create the antibodies to mold that are necessary to clear it from the system or to clear the antigens that are produced from the system, which is why that inflammatory sort of process is set up. So let's talk about the symptoms associated with mold illness, mold allergy. Fatigue. Fatigue is a big one. Fatigue that is not alleviated by sleep. And the sleep rhythm, the circadian rhythm can be really disrupted as well. Lung problems such as, cold and flu symptoms, recurrent colds and flus that are difficult to get rid of, coughing, asthma, sinusitis, hay fever, pneumonia. So lung respiratory symptoms are really common with mold issues. Chronic fatigue syndrome, mold illness is often misdiagnosed as chronic fatigue, where things like headaches and sleep disturbances, brain fog, where you can't find words, poor sort of short-term memory, being forgetful, fibromyalgia, so those unusual sort of body aches and pains. And interestingly, also inability to thermoregulate, so feeling hot or feeling cold, often. CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, is often linked with mold as well, mold exposure issues with mold. This is a chronic progressive illness that affects multiple body systems and similar sort of symptoms to chronic fatigue, brain fog, headaches, vertigo, metallic taste in mouth, aches and pains, numbness, tingling, sleep disturbances. It just sounds awful, doesn't it? And as you can see from that, both those chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms and the CIRS symptoms, they're multi-systemic. They're affecting multiple body systems. About 30% of people that are affected by mold will experience also excessive urination and thirst. And this is a really interesting one. Easily get shocked when touching appliances. So easily get electrical shocks. Many patients go on to develop chemical sensitivity and electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which just makes, the inflammatory process and all of these symptoms worse. And really important to note and to sort of help differentiate what's going on with someone is that symptoms often improve when they're away from the building that sort of has the mold in it. So it's pretty nasty symptoms, and you can see where, if you sort of show up to a doctor's office with fatigue, colds and flus, headaches, sleep disturbances, a lot of doctors don't, automatically think of mold or something within the environment that can be affecting, a particular person. So really important to sort of note these symptoms and see a practitioner that is very experienced in mold illness and mold health issues. So when we're thinking about mold, the cause of mold is moisture. So microorganisms like mold require food and moisture to thrive. And without the moisture, mold cannot survive. So important. The key to addressing mold problems is to identify the source of moisture. Once moisture sits on a surface for around 48 hours, the microbes on the surface will attempt to take over the space by producing endotoxins, mycotoxins, and microbial volatile organic compounds, which dramatically impact the indoor air quality and affect the health of the occupants of that particular building. So mold is a huge issue, and really also important to note that you don't have to see mold or smell dampness for it to be a problem. A huge amount of buildings are affected by mold, and we'll talk about sort of how to determine whether your house or a particular building does have mold as a problem. But what sort of leads to the moisture in the first place in buildings, there's a whole range of things. So condensation issues, plumbing, gutter or roof issues allowing moisture to penetrate inside the building, a building that is on a floodplain or above a watercourse, poor drainage around the home, building on a hill or at the bottom of a hill, having garden beds butting up against the house. Obviously, humidity is a big contributor to mold growth and water within buildings. So living in humid areas where the relative humidity is consistently over 70%, increases, that moisture and mold issue inside buildings. Absent or insufficient waterproof barriers in the wet areas of the home. And we might not even know that this is happening within our bathrooms. It can be a mistake by a tradie made on the waterproof barriers, and then all of a sudden we have a mold issue in our home. Insufficient subfloor ventilation, damage to the damp-proof course. Metal-framed homes create thermal bridges where condensation occurs. Concrete slab has not yet cured and is consequently releasing tons of moisture into the indoor air. Water-damaged timber used to build a home or was left out in the rain during construction, and so many more. So this information is directly from Nicole Bilsma, from her amazing book, Healthy Home, Healthy Family. So these are the things that she lists as, really common sources of water damage in home that leads to mold. Now, if we are looking at testing our home for mold, so if you're thinking, I would really like to figure out whether mold is an issue in my home, just know that it is a complicated procedure. And, for the most accurate results, you want to consider hiring either a building biologist, and you can head on over to buildingbiology.com.au if you're in Australia to find a list of people in your area, or an IICRC accredited mold remediator. And IICRC is the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning and Restoration Certification. So really, what I'm getting at is you need a professional that knows what they're doing to determine whether mold is an issue in your home and sort of how you can get rid of it. And, a lot of people with mold illness or mold allergy need to move homes, because once there has been water damage, the mold can be really difficult to get rid of. So as I said, you don't necessarily see mold, and there's a lot of misinformation and lots of information on how to get rid of mold if you look online. And again, Nicole Bilsma talks about the fact that bleach is ineffective in cleaning and killing fungi like mold. And the reason for that is because it's highly alkaline and may provide the microbes in a water-damaged building with a food source. So that is not what we want. And bleach only bleaches the mold until such a time that the melanin compounds recover, and voila, within weeks, the mold becomes visible again. So bleach doesn't get rid of mold. It sort of, colours it. And so we don't want to be, relying on just bleach to get rid of mold. The other thing that is often talked about online are essential oils. So clove essential oil, tea tree essential oil. And while these essential oils are effective antifungal agents, they are very sort of strong, and the vast amount of, say, clove or tea tree essential oil that is required to remediate a mold issue can be toxic to children and also to chemically sensitive individuals, which people that sort of are reacting to mold or have mold illness often are. there's a lot of science to mold, and killing mold is irrelevant when most spores are already dead. In terms of they can't germinate, but they can still cause harm when they are inhaled. So it's another reason why using things like bleach or clove essential oil are not the kind of be all and end all when it comes to mold. So the best way to deal with mold is to physically remove it. And this can be achieved by what's known as like a HEPA sandwich, which involves vacuuming the affected surface using a vacuum cleaner fitted with a HEPA filter, HEPA filter, and then wiping with a damp microfiber cloth and then vacuuming again. And the microfiber cloth should be soaked in 1/2 litre of water with a squirt of dishwashing liquid. And so this procedure will remove the biofilm that microbes in a water-damaged building feed on. So then the cloths need to be rinsed thoroughly before reusing. And at the end of the job, the cloth should be discarded along with the HEPA filter and disposable vacuum cleaner bag. So it's quite a process. And you can find out more about, like the details of dealing with mold and getting rid of mold, as I said, in Nicole Bilsma's brilliant book, Healthy Home, Healthy Family. I just really, today wanted to bring, attention to this area. There was a lot of information circulating after the big floods here in Australia. Was that last year or the year before? Because there was so many buildings that were water damaged, hence so many people whose health was being affected by mold. And when it comes to children, we do need to be aware of this sort of list of symptoms that I went over at the start of this podcast episode, to determine whether our kids may be, or our kids' health may be being affected by mold, or whether mold within the house could be contributing to your child's, recurrent colds and respiratory symptoms, tiredness, sleep disturbances. As you heard, there's a whole range of symptoms that can be associated with mold illness. So I am hoping to get, to continue to cover this topic on mold on the podcast in the future, and to get some experts in this area on. So watch this space for that. But this is sort of designed to be an introduction and to just build that awareness about mold and how it can impact our health, and how it's not as easy as just bleaching or getting some clove oil to get rid of the mold in your house. Like, it can be a really big issue. And as I've said, people have had to move houses that are affected by mold to, really get rid of that source that's affecting their health. So I hope this was an interesting episode for you to listen to. I'd love to hear from you if you have, if you've been affected by mold, if you feel like your children's symptoms may be, associated with mold. And also, I'd love to hear from you also if you want more information on mold in some more informative podcast episodes. So reach out to me on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids for that. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be back next week with a new series on the podcast. So make sure you tune in to find out what that is. Bye for now. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.